Thank you so much for joining us for today's SmartBear webinar, Optimizing Test Management in Jira with a Data Center Deployment. Before we get started and introduce our panelists, I just wanted to address a couple of housekeeping items, some FAQs. First, the session is being recorded, so we will send out the video in the next 24 to 48 hours to the email that you signed up for the session with. We hope that you enjoy it, and we'd encourage you to share it with your teammates and on social media. That would be great. Second, we'll do our best to answer your questions at the end of the session. So please use the Q&A box. There's actually a chat and a Q&A box. We'll be looking at the Q&A box, so please enter your questions there, and we'll do our best to answer those at the end of the session. So without further ado, let me introduce you to today's presenters. First, we have Ashwini, who is our product marketing manager here at SmartBear. She'll be walking us through some of the slides today. How's it going, Ashwini?
Hey, PJ. Thank you for the introduction. I'm good.
Great. And we're also joined by Kevin Pham, who will be demonstrating Zephyr for Jira to us. How's it going, Kevin?
It's going good, PJ. Happy to have everyone on.
Awesome. And just so everyone knows, in the background, we've also got Ryan and Fraser, who will be helping to answer some questions as well. So with that, I will kick it over to Ashwini to start the presentation and walk through the agenda.
Thank you very much, PJ. So welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. You are here for the Optimized Test Management in Jira with Data Center webinar. And like PJ has already introduced us, so let's take a look at the agenda. So let's take a look at what you all can expect to learn in this webinar. We'll do an overview of test management. We'll discuss the benefits of Jira Data Center. We'll give a live demo of the Zephyr for Jira product with our data center deployment. And at the end, we'll have time for Q&A. So please feel free to send in your questions, and we'll as we walk you through the webinar. So let's get started with a brief overview of SmartBear. SmartBear was founded in 2009 in Boston, and we have grown to 11 global offices and over 500 employees now. SmartBear is widely known for its open source tools, especially Swagger and SOAP UI, which you guys must have heard. Today, we have over 6.5 million users and 22,000 customers trusting us with their software development. If you look at the breadth and depth of our portfolio, you can see that our portfolio spans across the entire software development lifecycle with product offerings in each important category, be it planning, creating, monitoring, and finally managing and analyzing with Zephyr. Coming to the overview of test management, we know we have a mix of an audience here, so we would like to, give a brief overview of test management. As we know, test management is essentially the process by which software teams plan, develop, execute, and report on all their testing activities across the software development lifecycle. So test management really helps organizations take a structured approach for their development and testing process and keep the testing efforts organized across teams. So let's also take a look at why there is a need for a test management tool. The first and the foremost reason, every organization today is looking for solutions that will help them deploy software much faster and without sacrificing on quality. So what a test management tool really helps you to solve this pain point is by addressing all of the important function that you would need for efficient testing, right from the planning stage to creation, execution, and reporting on these activities. So organizations are also often managing various forms of testing, including automated and manual testing. They have API, unit tests, and others. So there is a need to manage all of this testing data in a way that you can get the insights that you need ultimately from it, which is possible through a test management tool. Test coverage is important in indicating the efficiency of your testing process and know if you're testing enough. And quality teams need to assess appropriate test coverage to identify any gaps in the requirement early on. Similarly, managers and QA leads need to track relevant quality metrics and utilize traceability reports so they can identify the bottlenecks and get that end-to-end traceability. If you're an organization dealing with globally distributed teams and have multiple teams doing testing, there is a need for managers and even higher executives, the VP of engineering, VP of quality assurance, who need to get visibility across the testing process and make sure that teams are on track and they're well aligned with the release goals. So all of these are, the critical reasons why teams would need a test management tool by essentially allowing everyone from testers, developers, managers to access all of this testing assets in a centralized and shared space, and providing even other business stakeholders like product managers, analysts, visibility into the release cycle. Test management really helps you to bring the whole picture together. With that, we have a quick poll question for you. We are really very interested to know what tools are you currently using for your test management. Are you using Jira, spreadsheets, or proprietary tools? So please, we have given you a few choices, so check in the one that's appropriate for you. I'll give you a few seconds here.
Fraser, are you able to launch the poll on your end?
Yeah, I'll do that now.
All right, cool. Thank you. There we go.
Okay, great. You're seeing some responses come in. And as expected, I think Jira is definitely the top choice here. So 63% voted for Jira. That's great. So if we go to our next slide, we also did ask this. Okay, I'm just going to share the results for everyone here. So we did ask this question in our state of testing survey last year, which collected thousands of respondents, from various personas, including developers, testers, and QA managers. And PJ, if you could, hit the screen here. So this, this survey really had responses from developers, testers, QA managers, and we saw that almost a third of respondents did use, spreadsheets, and almost 60% confirmed using Jira for test management. So that is in line with what we saw in our poll today too. That is why our focus today would be to demonstrate how you can really optimize your test management with a native solution like Jira in its data center deployment. So let's do a data center overview. Let's look at what is really this data center and how is it different from a Jira server. So data center essentially is a self-hosted on-premise deployment option, which helps teams effectively scale their mission critical applications with active-active clustering and the better data and infrastructure control. So the key architectural difference between the server and the data center is that data center will allow multi-nodes to run in parallel as opposed to a single node on server. And therefore, when that single node fails, your users can no longer access the application. Hence, whenever we talk of data center, we always stress that data center is built for mission critical applications. Here you can also see the key PJ, we should, thank you very much. We can also see the key components of data center architecture here. We have the load balancer, which users can choose and easily configure depending on the one that best suits their existing infrastructure and environment. And this is a very key component because this will essentially distribute the traffic to the application node cluster seen below. The number of nodes configured in a cluster really depends on, the customer needs, the number of users you have and how much of the data that they need to access. So there is no really a fixed number here, but generally it is observed that a 2 to 4 node cluster serves well. Then you have the database, which is installed separately from the application nodes. And Atlassian does support a range of databases, including Postgres, Oracle, MySQL, Microsoft SQL Server. Lastly, you have the shared file system, which is again set up on its own independent node, and it stores the same data that you would on a server, which includes your plugins, your logos, import, export files, etc. And there are various evaluation criteria that can prove effective in determining the switch to DC. The most important one is the number of users and the concurrent users that are working on the application. In a study conducted by Atlassian, they observed that 60% of their server customers switch over to DC at the 500 to 2000 tier range. Similarly, companies should also evaluate the critical performance requirements, and most importantly, what is the extent of cost you would incur in case of any downtime event. So to be able to make that informed decision to migrate over to data center. With that, let's take a look at some of the many benefits actually of data center deployment. High availability. This is key, and this is achieved through active-active clustering and the load balancing component. So data center allows the clustering of multiple servers, which reduce dependency on a single server and ensures that team get that uninterrupted access. With load balancer, it will help you to streamline the traffic across nodes and automatically transfer a failed session if it's caused by a node failure over to an active node in the pool, and helps to start an active session when there is a new incoming request. Performance at scale, this is extremely valuable for organizations who have large instances and geographically distributed teams where there is an increasing number of concurrent users. So what we see is that generally during peak times and high loads, there could be performance degradation. So with load balancer, again, the data center ensures that no single node is overloaded with user requests. It ensures that all the incoming traffic is distributed optimally and only to the active or the online nodes. So this results in maintaining an acceptable response times at all times for all the requests. One of the, I would say this is one of the most important reason why customers seek data center, because they want the ability to scale in the true sense and be easily add those nodes and grow your cluster horizontally without experiencing any downtime. So the existing nodes will automatically sync indexes and plugins with new nodes. So it essentially takes the complexity out. Depending on the level of scalability you are trying to achieve, you can also get a better sense of what your costs will look like, because data center is licensed by user counts. Disaster recovery is crucial for enterprises. Again, in the event there is a site-wide outage, data center provides the ability to copy indexes from primary servers to remote disaster recovery servers, in addition to copying the database and shared storage folders. So what this index replication really helps is that it will minimize the disruption and helps teams get faster recovery, because you completely do away with the need to rebuild these indexes upon startup, and you can just get up and running quickly. With infrastructure flexibility, organizations can deploy data center in the environment of their choice. So depending on what kind of flexibility and cost structure you're looking at currently, you can choose the deploy, on a virtual architecture, or go with a service provider like Azure or Microsoft or the Amazon Web Services. And Atlassian has built very specific templates and guides with these service providers. So these are all available on the Atlassian marketplace, and a great resource for users to get started with these service providers. Lastly, data center also gives you better control on how end users access and use the systems. So it has the SAML 2.0 support, which is the security assertion markup language that allows a service to exchange authorization data with any identity provider. So what this really helps is that teams can use their existing identity provider for authentication, and there is the single sign-on functionality, which is great, as users don't have to worry about remembering 100 passwords, while ensuring you are getting the optimal security and the optimal level of access that is needed at that point. So that essentially covers the key data center benefits. And with that, I will pass over to Kevin, who will provide a demo of Zephyr for Jira and show the product in action.
Thanks, Ashwini, for the presentation. Hi, folks. I'll be going over the Zephyr for Jira Data Center demo today. Just give me a minute. I'll bring it up. So this is essentially the kind of overview of Zephyr for Jira Data Center. I'll be going over essentially Zephyr for Jira as a whole, just kind of the basics of it. And then we'll be moving into the Zephyr for Jira Data Center settings, which has a couple different settings available for your administrator. So the first thing is when you first install Data Center and Zephyr for Jira, you'll get a test menu at the top here, which will show a certain functions within the system. We can search for tests, we can create a test, and there's a lot of other things we can do, planning test cycles, which is essentially grouping together our test cases and our executions for our test cases. So the first thing what we want to do is obviously, like, in our system in Jira, we have our user stories. For example, this one right here, we have, as a user, I want to be able to install the application from a Google Play Store. And what we want to do is create a test case for this user story. There's multiple ways to create a test case. We can either use the test menu up here and either just click create a test, or just click the create button up here. So we'll just click the create button. From here, in our issue type, we can change the story to test, and we can create a test case right here. So we'll change it right now. We'll change it to, we'll validate it so the mobile application can be downloaded and installed on a smartphone. And then there's a lot of other different Jira fields, obviously, you can fill out as your description, fixed versions, your labels, anything like that. If it relates to any other kind of issue, we can also do that as well. But for now, we'll just click create. And here it will show that our test case that was just created within Jira. And there's obviously other settings in here to distinguish whether or not an issue is a test case or a user story. The main detail here is the test details section, where we can create test steps, test data, and expected results. So for example, we can create certain steps for our test case, whether it be, log into the application or do something, a certain step for your test case, essentially. So we'll just fill this out for now. And this is kind of very generic test step. We'll add this to our test case. And you can see here that it was added with a test ID of 1. And then we have our test step, our test data, expected results, and attachments. We can also have custom fields for our test case and our test steps by adding it in Zephyr Jira right over here. For now, we'll have one of our custom steps. We'll change it to, can it be reproduced? We'll select yes. And one of the main features of Zephyr Jira for our test steps is that we can freeze our test steps IDs and test steps. So this column right here is our test step ID, and this right here is our test steps. And if we have, for example, we had multiple different custom fields, it might be a little bit difficult to keep scrolling back and forth here. As you can see, we're not sure what we're referencing. So if we freeze these test steps, we can freeze this column, and then we can scroll endlessly to see, what we can reference back from our custom fields back to our test steps. So that's one of the main features for our test steps. In this section, we have our test executions, which shows our executions of this test step within certain test cycles and executions. We'll go back to this in a little bit. So from here on out, we'll go to our test cycles, is where we kind of plan our test cases to be executed. We'll go to our test cycles. And on this page, we can see our cycle summary. This is one of our sprints that we created. We can create a new cycle here. So we'll go to version 2, create a new cycle. We'll name this sprint 2. So this is our new cycle that we just created. There's a lot of different, logistics here that we can look at, whether there was a build given, anything like that, log time. And what you want to do next is add your test to your test cycle to be executed. So we'll go here. We'll select which test case that we just created, which is TP29, the one where we wanted to download the application, and then add it to our test cycle. After it's added, you can see it right here. Now, this is essentially a way to hold all your test cases within a certain folder structure. We can add more folders if you want to kind of structure it however we want, or we can just add it straight into the test cycle itself to be able to be executed. Now, there's multiple ways to execute a test case within the actual cycle itself. You can quick execute it by using the status column. So if you know a test case is going to pass, you can quickly switch this to pass, fail, work in progress, blocked, or unexecuted. As of right now, every time a test case is added into a cycle, it will always be set to unexecuted. Another way of executing your test case is by selecting the E button right here, which will take us to the test execution page for this very specific test case. So we'll click this right now to give a demonstration. This will take us to our test execution page for this specific test case, as you can see right up here with the same ID. And this field right here, the test execution status, will allow us to execute our test case. It executes our overall test case. So if we want to change it again to pass, fail, work in progress, or blocked, we can do that. And from this page as well, we can change, who is it we can assign it to in our Zephyr Jira system, and then add any defects that might be, attached to this certain execution. There's a lot of different fields we can add and change, comments. We can add custom fields for a test execution, any attachments. And one of the key features for test execution in Zephyr Jira is that we can also execute our test steps for our test case. Using this test detail section, we can view the status here and manually change, how our test steps are passing and failing, anything like that. So for example, I can pass this. And if I pass this, it's going to ask if I want to pass the overall test case, because that's how essentially will show the status of the test case execution for the overall, depending on the status of the test steps. So for now, we'll change this from pass and we'll execute it. And if we scroll back up, we can see the overall test case execution is also pass. One of the other key features of our test execution is that we can see the execution history here, which will show us the changes that are made from our test execution, whether it be from unexecuted to pass. Maybe we'll change this to fail, and then this will be updated as well. And then the one other key feature is being able to link your test steps, the defects. We can link the defects to our test steps to see, where things go wrong, anything like that. So for example, here, we can create a new defect if we want to straight out of Jira. We will change this to bug, but for now, we'll just add a different defect. We can type the defect in and see which ones we can want to link. And this was essentially linking our defects to our test execution, which would then provide us with full traceability from user story to test case to essentially our test execution and then our defects. So for example, we'll go back to our test case, and maybe we want to link this to that user story that we originally saw. So we'll change this and we'll have it relate to the user story that we wanted originally. And we'll link it right there. And if you notice, when I scrolled down earlier, in our test execution section, we saw that we executed our test case within this certain cycle. We executed within the release 2.0, and we executed within sprint cycle, or sprint 2 test cycle. And we can see it passed. We have any other defects. If you highlight over it, we can go straight to the defect. And if you wanted to execute it again, we can click the E button again. So one of the main features also that we provide is a traceability for our test cases from our requirements all the way to our tests and to our executions and defects. So if we go here, click version 2, and if we were to click our user story, so say this is one that we want to view the traceability all the way from requirements all the way to our defects. We would click here, and then click generate. And here we can see our requirements, our test cases that are linked to it, any executions that have been performed on this test case, and then any defects that have been linked to their execution. And if you wanted further information on, our requirements, our test cases, or our defects, we can simply click in here and it'll take us straight to our issue. So that's kind of a general overview of, Zephyr Jira basics, kind of getting the hands of, test management. And one of the things that Data Center provides is we have certain settings for our administrator. We'll go in here. And in our add-on section, we have multiple different settings for our Zephyr Jira. We have general configuration, obviously stuff you can set up. We can customize our test steps and test step statuses. So as before, we saw there's pass, fail, work in progress. This is all editable. You can change it yourself. You can add new fields if you wanted to. And you can also add custom fields for your executions or your test steps. Now, again, what I said, one of the main things Zephyr Jira Data Center brings are these data center settings. We have our support tool, which allows us to essentially pull logs from our system, whether it be Zephyr logs from our home directory. We can pull our cluster properties, anything like that, any information regarding that in our shared directory. We can pull our Tomcat logs. And we can simply do this by just selecting which one we want, or you can select all of them and then click download. This will be a zip file, which you can obviously open up and then view it yourself. The next thing that we provide is a data or integrity checker, which allows us to essentially check every single thing that's running within Zephyr Jira. For example, we want to, provides a query essentially for our cycles, our executions, our test cases. It provides a count of it. So if we click this right here, we'll click display, we'll show it. It'll show all of our counts in our DB for, any cycles we have, any test cases we have, like the test case count, any executions done. Right now, this is a little bit of bare bones. You can see that, there's not a lot of data in here right now because of how this system is currently set up. But as you build out your system and you add more test cases to your system, and as you add more cycles, do more executions for your test cases, these numbers will increase. And you can see the status here is green, meaning that it matches up with what you have in the DB to make sure that everything is basically in check. The last thing we want to go over is our index recovery. So this provides us an opportunity to kind of have a backup for our system. Right now, as you can see, when we first have it set, the enable index recovery is off. We can edit it here, and we can have a scheduled backup recovery by setting it on, and then we can choose the day or how we want to schedule our backup to be done. So right now we can set it to daily, setting it this default time, we can click update. And when we set up our index recovery, it's done on this day, it's on a daily, however we want it to be scheduled. And then the snapshot directory is sent to here, wherever you essentially have the cluster set up. And if you wanted to, an option to provide is that we have a file name, and essentially we can pull back and back up and go, to one of our backups if you want. If you can provide the file name for your backup and your snapshot directory, you can click recover here after you put the file name. And essentially that kind of goes over our main data center settings. We can go back to the presentation if we can. Yep. As a recap and as a reference, everyone, I wanted to go back over the data center settings. The main key differentiators is that, our data center settings provide a support tool to essentially pull our logs, Zephyr for Jira, your Tomcat logs, and then the cluster logs as well. We have our integrity checker to make sure that, it's pulling all the queries to essentially make sure that, your DB matches up with what's in your Zephyr for Jira system. And then you have your index recovery, essentially to schedule your backups and perform anything like that. And that should be, covering Zephyr Jira Data Center.
Awesome. So I think we've got a poll question that we want to launch. Fraser, you want to pop that up there? Thank you. So question number 2 that we have here today is, what is your current status with regards to Jira Data Center deployment? Is it something that you're already using? Are you looking to move there? Still kind of just exploring the options, or not quite sure yet? Cool. So let's take a look at the results we've got. Pretty good mix between people using data center, looking to move there, and trying to figure things out on their side. Great. So I think our next section here would be Q&A. Fraser, do you have any questions on your side that you think make sense that we want to address here?
Yeah, so looking through the Q&A now, one of the questions asked says, had you created the test from the test menu while viewing the original story, would the issue link have been created automatically instead of having them manually add the link after creating the test? And to answer that question, yes, if you create the test directly from the user story, the link is created automatically. And then another question we had that I'm looking through right now is, does Jira Data Center include auto-scaling features? Based on load, does it automatically add nodes, or do we need an AWS or other hosting application for auto-scaling? Jira Data Center does not include an auto-scaling feature. However, Jira Data Center on AWS will help on scheduling for an additional node, but it takes time to bring up the node and doesn't really work like an auto-scale based on load. But when when a country's user base is going to log in and add more load, you can schedule the node generation accordingly. And then that's really a gist of most of the questions. If there are questions that weren't answered, please feel free to reach out to our team, unless Ryan you see any more that you feel like you can answer on the call, or Kevin.
Yeah, sure. So there's some questions I see. For example, can you clone an existing test cycle or sprint? And you can actually clone a test cycle and sprint. Another one of these questions was, is there a way to copy a test cycle from another execution? So when you add tests to a test cycle, we can pull these tests from another test cycle or execution essentially and pull it into a new cycle, if that makes any sense.
Great. Well, sounds like we are all set for today. So we just want to thank everyone for joining us and for your questions. Thank you to Ashwini for the presentation and Kevin for the demonstration, as well as Fraser and Ryan with helping us to answer some of these questions. Definitely stay tuned. We'll send out the recording to this webinar within the next 24 to 48 hours. So you'll get that via email. And don't forget to follow us on social media and check out getzephyr.com. We'll be doing more webinars in the coming months. So thanks everyone for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.